Being interested in painting means that you can't just be interested in technique. Think about that for a minute. You have to also figure out where you fit into the world. Why are you creating this painting? The world is overflowing with paintings. There's a million paintings of flowers on tables. A lot of people don't even care about the millions of paintings of flowers on tables already. So figure out where you want to fit into the world and why you're creating a painting. And if you don't know where you fit into, then you should know about the other painters who came before you. That's the easiest place to start. If you don't know where you are right now, look to the past and see how painting has progressed over the years and figure out how you want to be part of that progression. Now, you may be thinking that you don't have some sort of lofty ambition to become the next greatest artist. You just want to paint some flowers, and that's okay. However, even the decision to paint flowers on a table has a long and vibrant history. And to deny yourself of flower painting history also denies you of one of the greatest resources that you have as somebody trying to learn how to paint. I'll get more into this concept later. Oftentimes people are scared, offended, or angry with contemporary art. And this stems from a feeling that the artist is trying to be smarter than the viewer. A sort of dictatorial power where viewers must look at the creations that the artists make. This is generally made into a straw man argument, complete with references to some obscure performance art piece, which seems highly inaccessible. Think of like Joseph Beuys's I Love America and America Loves Me, where he was taken in an ambulance to the airport, and then he got onto an airplane, and he was flown to the U.S., and once he was in the U.S., they put him in an ambulance, drove him to the gallery. In the ambulance, he got out of the ambulance, and they put him in a room where he wrapped himself in a felt blanket, and he was stuck in the room with a coyote, I think, for like 2 days. And then at the end of the piece, he went back into the ambulance and got taken back to the airplane and got flown back to Germany. So this could be an easy place where people are like, what the hell is that art? That's not art. That's just a guy flying on a plane. And they view pieces like Beuys's piece as tricks. Like there's some sort of trick where, there's this secret collusion between these rich dealers and the art magazines and the critics, and they all come together and they conspire, and then they think, ha ha ha, we found it, we're going to come up with the stupidest thing possible, and we're going to, get an ambulance, and then we're going to put him in a room with a coyote. It's going to be hilarious, and I'll get $1 million. This doesn't happen, first of all, okay? So just erase this idea from your brain. That's not how things work. And Beuys has a really huge career as an artist, as a sculptor, and his work pans, decades. And so you can get into his work, and then you can delve further into the work that came before him, who influenced him, what his own personal influences were. You can learn that he got shot down when he was a pilot in the war, and the people, he was almost dead, but I think it was in Mongolia or something, they found him and they smeared lard all over his body to keep him warm, and then they wrapped him in these felt blankets. And that was, obviously this experience, and he made all this work dealing with felt over the years. So we learn more about the artist. We start figuring out, why he made the things that he made, even if they are as strange as Beuys's piece, I Like America and America Likes Me. So let's we can get back to painting. And since we're focused on, creating works generally that are paint on a canvas or on a surface that you put onto a wall, let's look at an artist who right now is kind of a controversial painter, not because he does anything that's shocking or anything like that, but because his works are deemed to be boring and lifeless. And this is the work of an artist named Lucian Smith. And if we look at this piece, we can see, some resemblance to Pollock's drip paintings and abstract expressionism. I'll get more into abstract expressionism when we do the entire 20th century survey later on. But this is just kind of to whet your appetite. So there's obviously the connection to Jackson Pollock because he's dripping and Smith is dripping, right? But if we look at Pollock's work, his canvases are extremely dense, and we can see that there's kind of a more of a vibrancy and there's more of a variation of color. With Smith's work, they tend to be these black and white, very kind of simple black and white paintings. As we delve further into Smith's work, we can see that these abstract paintings are just one way of many styles that he paints. So Pollock is the drip guy, right? Pollock makes drip paintings. Everybody sees a Pollock, they know that it's a Pollock. Smith doesn't have to do that. We live in a time now where we can paint in a lot of different styles. We're not bound by just one specific style. This is kind of a relic of even just 20 or 30 years ago, and artists like Gerhard Richter, who have been successful at doing photorealistic work, as well as, landscape paintings, figurative paintings, and his giant squeegee abstract paintings. He's probably the most important painter in the world. You should check out more of his works. But painters can wear a lot of different hats, and Smith is kind of playing on this role. If you look at this other painting by Smith here, he's done almost like a thrift store looking beach scene, which seems like incredibly unincredible, and a lot of people see these as being kind of nihilistic because they're almost making fun of painting in a way. And he's saying that painting can just be a painting of a beach. So what? It's a painting of a beach, right? And it's kind of done in this ironic manner, and that kind of annoys some people. But you may be thinking, I don't like his work, and that's fine. I don't particularly like his works either, but whether you like something or not is irrelevant, really. It still exists, and it still can be used as an example of where the contemporary is at the moment. With this in mind, it is nearly impossible to say if a work of art is, quote, good or not. We don't judge works as being good or bad. One of the best quotes, I can't remember who said it. I wish I could. I tried to Google it out and I couldn't find it, but is that art generally amplifies personal experience of some sort. And so when we see a good piece of art, we feel kind of like this amplification of our own personal experience. It's like when you go to the movies and you start rooting for a specific character and you feel like, no, don't go in the room. And, even more so when you look at, or when you play video games where a guy's coming after you with a chainsaw and you feel like, no, get through, like, and you unload into his head or whatever. But these are, video games and movies are awesome and extremely powerful at making us feel these emotional triggers. And every piece of work doesn't necessarily have to make you feel something. That's kind of another myth about art making, that art is supposed to make you feel something. Well, maybe. It doesn't always have to, There's other reasons for artwork to exist besides just making you feel something. Anyway, let's what does this have to do with flower paintings? Okay, let's just look at flower paintings as a certain case where we can put these different types of techniques and looking at art to use. Flower paintings basically started flourishing in the 1600s in the Netherlands, and these painters depicted everyday scenes with amazing detail, and they were obvious true masters of oil paint as a medium. Artists such as Roelant Savory and Jacob Vossmeyer made a great living off of their works, and they lived very opulent, kind of rock star lifestyles. So the idea that historically speaking, you have to be dead to make a lot of money from your artwork isn't, really true. As we dig deeper into one of these works, let's look at Roelant Savory's painting titled, it's actually called this, Still Life. in this particular painting, there are over 40 different flowers, and these flowers come from many different countries. So to be able to paint from all these different flowers in real life meant that you had to have access to money, and it was no mistake that Roelant became the court painter for King Rudolph in Prague. So yeah, kings used to have painters because painters made things which were thought of as status symbols, like, hey, check out this awesome vase that I have, and I've got 40 different flowers from, Africa and all over the world, and I can afford to have these flowers just sit on my table for 3 days. That took, however long it took to ship flowers back in the 1600s, I don't know. But I'm sure, the average family who was sitting down to eat some pork and maybe a piece of bread, probably didn't have access to these same flowers. But to be able to paint from all these flowers in real life meant that you had to have access to money. And this, is obvious because, as I said earlier, this is the reason why he ended up becoming the court painter, so to speak, for King Rudolph in Prague. Let's think about who is the guy that enabled Roelant to make paintings, right? So this is the basic tenet of capitalism, where the market drives what's popular and what's not. And as we see with art time and time again over the years, there's obviously a lot of challenges to this, such as when Michelangelo, does the Sistine Chapel, and he's kind of like, screw you guys, I'm going to do it how I want. And then they're like, no, I'm kind of freaked out. And then they come back and they're like, this is awesome. So sometimes, the people that have money try to control the painters, and the artists, invariably resist that, and thankfully they do, because otherwise they would end up making like extremely boring social realist, like the communist paintings that they made in the former Soviet Union, some of the most boring paintings after they kicked out all the abstract expressionists because they were seen as anti-revolutionary, because they're creating work that is not exemplifying the community and coming together and all these sort of things that anyway, they went to New York, and we can go off on another entire tangent on that, because those artists in New York, we know, were actually, some of them were used by the CIA, and that abstract expressionism was shown to be this kind of exemplification of American freedom, and look at our artists, they can do whatever they want. We don't care if they're, not painting a painting of 5 guys carrying sledgehammers. So there's that aspect of money and funding and the whole market aspect of art. But let's go back to just Rudolph, right? Why did Emperor Rudolph, why did he like Roelant in particular? And when we start looking at him, he's actually kind of an interesting character. He was interested in magic and alchemy, as a lot of people were at the time, and astronomy he thought was really awesome, and he loved collecting things, and he thought things had certain powers, basically, and that beautiful things had certain powers. And a lot of times, this objectification of objects, that's why they're objects, can be seen, and we do this all the time. When you go up to somebody on the street and you say, hey, can you put on this sweater? And they're like, what? Why? And you're like, no, just put on this sweater. And then you get somebody to put on the sweater, and then you're like, that was Jeffrey Dahmer's sweater. And they're like, I don't want to wear Jeffrey Dahmer's sweater. But instead of that, you could give them a pen and say, hey, do you want to sign your name with this pen? This was Mark Twain's pen. Do you want to use Mark Twain's pen? People are like, oh, wow, cool. Yeah, I want to sign my name with that. And that's because we give objects power, right? And so Emperor Rudolph shared this idea to an extreme a little bit more, and he thought that Roelant's paintings had this power, and that he was the painter that could best reproduce flowers in the natural world, and the natural world. At this time, we're post-Renaissance, so people are getting into science and thinking science is cool. The Enlightenment has happened, and they're getting away from the kind of the dark ages of religion and moving into a more scientifically accepted realm where previously astronomers are being persecuted and all this. Now they're kind of being elevated, and emperors are into alchemy. So, do you see what just happened there? We started with a flower painting, and then we went to European empires, then we went to alchemy, and then we thought about issues of wealth and class, and who the paintings were for, and why they were created. So you can start to see why a painting is more than just his technique. There's a lot more things in that one painting, that still life of flowers. There's a lot bigger story than just the flowers on the table that day. And that's why we consider paintings to be important cultural relics. They tell us about the culture, and probably the best way we have for the past. Now people say you can look at commercials. If you want to know about a culture, look at commercials and see how people try to sell to people. And I don't necessarily disagree with that. That's probably the best way to learn about a culture now, is not to look at painting, but look at the commercials on TV. So let's get back to you. What do you want to do? How does this benefit you? How does this help you? You see, you need to first discover what type of flower paintings, we'll just go with the flower painting example, what type of flower paintings that you're attracted to and why. And by default, you're going to go to technique first. And this is understandable because you still probably need to build a skill set. So look at the technique first and get into that technique. Don't go for content first, go for pure technique. This is a thing that happens all the time in art schools all around the world. Students can't create a piece technically at the level they want to create it, so they just kind of, go halfway, and instead of really focus on technique and, go to boot camp for your technique. Okay? If you want to learn about glazing and the types of ways that these paintings were constructed in the 1600s, this is your deal. That's what you're doing. Figuring out what mediums they used, figure out what paints they used, figure out what their palette, what type of colors they had on their palette. How did they varnish the painting afterwards? How did they light these things? Look at all these different types of things. Another thing, as one of my favorite painting instructions I had painting instructors that I had in Lyme Academy in Connecticut, was a guy named Stephen Sheehan, and he's really a great American modernist painter. I think he kind of follows into this modernist tradition, but he said, if you're painting a landscape, put a car in it, because then at least people are going to know when it was painted. And this is a really simple way of just dating your work. Make it a historical artifact. Even Roelant's painting of flowers on the table, as we just talked about, has become a historical artifact. And that's because of how it's painted, but it's also because of when it was painted and who commissioned the work, or whose work he was creating it for. So if you're making a painting for your grandma to go over the house that's supposed to be decorative and match the couch, that's totally, there's nothing wrong with that. But think about, what's the history of decorative paintings to go over couches? It's probably a lot more varied and interesting than you're giving it credit for. So figure out a way to date the work, okay? If you're putting your flowers on the table, are you going to leave them in the plastic bag with the supermarket's logo on it? Are you going to take them out? Are you going to put them into a vase? If so, what kind of vase are you going to put them into? Are you going to put them into a 100-year-old vase that your grandma had? Are you going to put them in a McDonald's cup? How are you going to light them? Are you going to use classical form lighting? Will the painting be done like in chiaroscuro with high contrast, kind of like Caravaggio's works? Or will they be more bland with pastel colors, kind of like Morandi's work? Figure out these things before you get into your painting. I'm going to give you three things to look at, kind of a checklist for paintings. And the first thing is, when constructing a painting, and no matter what style you're getting into, first find out what are the materials and techniques, as we're talking about. What are the materials? What are the varnishes? What are the paints? What are the colors? And what techniques? How is the paint being applied to the canvas? By identifying the materials and techniques that another artist used, you can develop a work schedule which allows you to, simply get better at your abilities and hone your skill set. And this is, the nuts and bolts of the work. This isn't, the real core, as we're discussing, the real importance behind the work. Then I want you to look at what are some other artists known for using the same technique. Become really familiar with the other artists that you have used this technique. There's probably a lot of other people besides, Roelant. We're kind of, stressing, but look at all these different artists that came from the same time period. Make a list of them, make a blog about them, make a blog of nothing but paintings of flowers on tables. That would be cool. Make a Pinterest board of them. I don't know. There's a million different ways to keep track of the imagery now. And soak yourself in that imagery. Don't just sit there and look at it for 5 seconds on your phone and go, okay, good, click. No. Dig into one painting. Figure it out. And the last one, as I was saying, is what is the historical context of the work? And this one tends to freak students out a little bit. And that's understandable because, obviously the history of painting is huge. And then we have the history of art, and we can go back, 20,000 years to the Lascaux caves. And there's you sitting with a paintbrush in your hand, and you're like, wait, where am I supposed to fit in? How am I supposed to fit in with all this? But forget about that and just date it, just to begin. Let's say just date your work. Put something into your painting that makes it known that it's painted in the year 2014, okay? So don't freak out. As we discussed before, painting doesn't have to be about some lofty philosophical ambition. It can just be the flowers on the table. You just have to be aware of the decisions you're making when you place that vase and those flowers from your front yard in Minokan, North Dakota, on a new table from IKEA lit by a halogen bulb pointed at the ceiling. You can't escape it. A time and place is infused into every great work of art, and there's no reason yours shouldn't have that as well. So don't diminish your story in exchange for some cheap technique, which can just be copied, okay? You're much more interesting than that, and I'll give you more credit, and I'll give your story more credit than that, and I think you can make some really interesting flowers on table paintings. So just to recap, figure out who you want to look at, get clear about what techniques of painting can be beneficial, and then figure out the historical context of your work. And yeah, that's about it. So start painting, start setting up your still life if you want to make a flower painting on the table. Make your own flower painting. It's a good assignment. I'll see you again next week with the next podcast. And if you like this sort of thing, you can go to paintingcourse.com and you can check out and you can take the whole course there from the beginning. So, thank you. See you later.